When I think back to that night, it began like any other Friday. The house smelled faintly of the dinner I had cooked earlier, simple pasta tossed with garlic and olive oil, my son's favorite, and the living room was littered with his scattered toys. I was tired, but I had promised a friend weeks ago that I would show up to her birthday party. Nights out were rare for me. Most evenings, I was wrapped in a cocoon of chores, bedtime routines, and waiting for my husband to return from his so-called late meetings. That evening, though, I felt like I deserved a small break from the ordinary rhythm of my life. I remember dressing quickly, choosing a navy dress that wasn't too revealing but still made me feel confident. My husband barely looked up from his phone as I kissed our son goodnight and told him to behave for Daddy. He muttered something about work emails and reminded me not to stay out too late. It was the usual dismissal, one I'd grown accustomed to, though a small part of me wished he had looked at me longer, told me I looked beautiful, or asked about the party. His indifference was becoming normal, even though it shouldn't have been. The party itself was loud and lively. Music pulsed through the speakers, laughter echoed around the room, and I allowed myself, for once, to feel like a version of me I hadn't been in years. Friends pulled me into conversations, glasses clinked, and I even danced a little. Still, the thought of home lingered in the back of my mind. My son was only 7. I never stayed out long when he was awake. Every mother knows that feeling, the pull to be present, no matter how much fun tempts you elsewhere. By the time I decided to leave, it was just past midnight. The streets were quieter now, the cool air brushing against my flushed cheeks. I drove home quickly, rehearsing in my mind what tomorrow would bring. Errands, laundry, perhaps a park trip with my boy. Ordinary things that kept life moving forward. When I pulled into our driveway, the lights were dim except for the soft glow in the hallway. I expected the house to be silent, everyone asleep. But when I opened the door, the sound of tiny footsteps padded toward me. My son stood there, his hair messy, his pajamas rumpled, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. His big eyes blinked up at me as if he'd been waiting. "Mommy, you're home," he whispered, relief flooding his voice. I was surprised to see him awake at this hour. I bent down, scooping him into my arms, and kissed the top of his head. "You should be asleep, sweetheart," I said gently, brushing his hair back. "Did you have trouble falling asleep without me here?" He shook his head, his face serious in a way children's faces aren't supposed to be. "I wasn't alone," he said softly. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean? Daddy was here with you, wasn't he?" His little hands clutched the dinosaur tighter, and he leaned closer, as if sharing a secret. "Daddy was here," he admitted. "But there was a lady too." They were laughing in the living room. She had red lips, and Daddy kissed her. For a moment, I froze. My body turned cold despite the warmth of the house, and my breath caught in my throat. I pulled back slightly to look at him, certain I had misheard. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He repeated it with the same innocent certainty, no hesitation, no awareness of the earthquake he was causing inside me. "Daddy kissed the lady. She smelled funny, like the soap you don't use." Then they laughed. His words were plain, unembellished, the way only a child could tell a story, truthful, unfiltered, and piercing. My hands trembled as I held him, and I forced a smile to hide the storm brewing inside me. Children don't lie about things like this, at least not with such vivid detail. The image of my husband with another woman, in our home, in front of our son, slammed into my chest like a blow. I tried to breathe, tried to tell myself it couldn't be true, that maybe he had dreamed it. But his clear eyes and solemn expression left no room for such comforting illusions. I swallowed hard, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sweetheart, are you sure? Maybe you were sleepy. Maybe it was just a dream?" He shook his head firmly. "It wasn't a dream. I saw it." Then he yawned, his small body curling against me, exhausted from staying up so late. "I wanted to tell you when you came home." As he drifted off in my arms, my mind raced. My husband had betrayed me. That was the conclusion I didn't want to reach but couldn't avoid. Not only had he betrayed me, he had done it here, under the same roof where our son lived, where our memories and promises were supposed to mean something. The weight of that realization crushed me. I carried my son to bed, tucking him in carefully, trying to mask the trembling in my hands. He murmured goodnight, and within moments, his breathing slowed into the deep rhythm of sleep. I stood there in the dim light of his room, staring at his innocent face, and felt tears burn behind my eyes. When I stepped into the hallway, everything felt different. The house that had once felt safe and familiar suddenly seemed tainted, every corner shadowed with suspicion. The silence of the night pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I glanced toward our bedroom door, where my husband lay sleeping, oblivious, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. That was the moment the words sank in fully, and my body shuddered as though I'd been plunged into ice water. My son's truth, spoken so simply, had shattered the fragile picture of my life. Nothing, I realized, would ever be the same again. My son's words echoed in my head long after I had tucked him into bed. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. Each time I tried, I saw flashes of what he had described. My husband in our living room, laughing, lips pressed against someone else's, as if the vows we exchanged meant nothing. I wanted desperately to believe it wasn't true, that he had misunderstood or been confused. Children can mix up stories, right? That was the thread I clung to as my chest tightened and the silence around me seemed unbearable. But the details wouldn't leave me. The red lipstick, the laughter, the scent of unfamiliar perfume. My son had never been the type to invent tales. He spoke with a raw, unvarnished honesty that came from innocence. He hadn't meant to hurt me, he had only shared what he saw. And that was what terrified me the most. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had happened. My husband was cheerful at breakfast, sliding a plate of eggs across the table, asking me about the party. His face showed no cracks, no hints of guilt. If anything, he seemed lighter than usual, as though something had been lifted off his shoulders. Watching him interact with our son, I searched for any trace of shame, but there was none. His laughter rang too naturally, his touch seemed too easy. That calm exterior was either the mask of an innocent man or the performance of a practiced liar. I found myself studying him in ways I never had before. When his phone buzzed, he angled it away. When I asked him simple questions about his day, his answers came with slight pauses, as though he was constructing them carefully. Every movement, every glance, felt suspicious. Yet at the same time, doubt gnawed at me. Was I letting paranoia twist everything? Was I on the verge of destroying my marriage over a child's observation? To test my son's words, I gently asked him again later that day, in the quiet of his room. I spoke casually, as though it wasn't important, but my heart pounded in my chest. "Remember what you told me last night? Can you tell me again?" Without hesitation, he repeated it. The lady had been wearing red lipstick. She had laughed loudly, and my husband had kissed her. He even described the way she smelled different from me, sweet and heavy, like flowers. His story didn't change, not a single detail. There was no wavering in his voice, no hesitation that would hint at imagination. That left me with a sickening certainty. Still, I told myself it could have been someone innocent, a friend, a relative, maybe even a neighbor. But then the darker possibility whispered in my ear, it wasn't innocent at all. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and I felt the floor of trust one had always stood on begin to crack. Memories began to resurface, moments I had brushed off in the past. The late nights at the office that seemed too frequent. The hushed phone calls where he stepped outside. The sudden bursts of generosity that felt like overcompensation. Each incident, once dismissed as harmless, now assembled into a chilling pattern. I remembered the time he came home smelling faintly of perfume and claimed it was a coworker's hug in passing. The time he said his battery died, and that was why he couldn't answer my calls. All those excuses, sewn together, created a fabric I could no longer ignore. I wanted to confront him right away, but something inside me held back. Perhaps it was fear of hearing the truth spoken out loud. Perhaps it was the knowledge that if I accused him without proof, he would deny it and twist the blame onto me. He had always been good with words, sharp in arguments, able to make me second-guess myself. If I was going to face him, I needed certainty, not just a child's testimony. The torment of uncertainty consumed me. Every time he smiled, every affectionate gesture felt poisoned. When he touched my hand at dinner, I pulled away under the guise of wiping something from my sleeve. When he kissed my forehead before leaving for work, I fought the urge to recoil. My heart no longer leapt at his touch. Instead, it shrank with dread. At night, I lay awake listening to his even breathing beside me, wondering how a man could sleep so soundly with lies tangled around him. I studied his face in the dim light, trying to see the truth written in his features, but all I saw was the stranger he was becoming to me. The weight of betrayal pressed heavier each day, though I had not yet confronted him. I thought of our son constantly. He was too young to understand the complexity of marriage, fidelity, and broken trust. Yet his innocence had exposed the truth I was blind to. The thought that he had been forced to witness his father's betrayal filled me with both sorrow and fury. Our home, which should have been a safe haven, had become a stage for deceit. My son's words were not just a revelation to me. They were scars on his childhood, imprints he would carry long after this moment passed. I found myself drifting between anger and denial. Some mornings I wanted to scream at my husband, demand answers, and tear apart every excuse. Other times, I begged myself to let it go, to believe in him, to preserve the fragile normalcy of our family. The battle between my mind and my heart was relentless, each side clawing at me until I could hardly recognize myself. But the seed of doubt had already grown too deep. I started noticing every inconsistency, every unexplained smile at his phone, every vague story about late nights. They no longer passed unnoticed. They screamed at me, demanding attention. My son's words had cracked the dam, and now every drop of suspicion poured through, flooding everything I thought I knew. I realized then that ignoring the truth would not protect me, nor would it protect my son. Pretending nothing had happened would only prolong the inevitable. If I was to reclaim even a shred of peace, I would have to face the truth head-on. My son had shown me more courage than I had managed myself, simply by speaking honestly. Now it was my turn. As I watched my husband gather his briefcase and kiss us goodbye before heading to work, I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My resolve hardened with every passing second. If he was hiding something, I would uncover it. I could no longer live in the shadows of doubt. The fear of what I might find was suffocating, but the fear of living a lie was far worse. That night, as I lay awake once more, staring into the darkness, I knew what I had to do. The days of denial were over. The truth, no matter how devastating, was waiting for me to uncover it. And I would. The days that followed became an exercise in quiet observation. I moved through the motions of my life, but every step was calculated, every glance intentional. I was no longer the oblivious wife. I was a woman piecing together a puzzle I never wanted to see completed. My son's words had planted the seed of betrayal, and now my own eyes were searching for proof to either confirm or dispel it. It began with the phone. My husband guarded it closely, never leaving it unattended, keeping it face down on the table. One night, when he showered, I seized the chance. My hands shook as I unlocked it, half hoping for nothing, half terrified of what I might find. My chest tightened when I saw the messages, innocent at first glance, but threaded with undertones no married man should entertain. Nicknames, late-night conversations, inside jokes. And then the unmistakable, heart emojis, phrases that no colleague would ever use, and questions about when they would meet again. I scrolled through with a sick feeling in my stomach. It wasn't just flirtation. There were references to evenings, to time spent together. My son's story was no fantasy. These words painted a truth darker than I was prepared to accept. Every text burned into me, each line a dagger. I closed the phone before he emerged, heart pounding, mind reeling, but the damage was done. I knew now. Still, I needed more. I began to notice patterns. His late meetings coincided with times the messages spiked. He came home smelling faintly of unfamiliar perfume, masked beneath cologne. Once I noticed a faint smear on his collar, not quite noticeable unless you were searching. And I was searching. Every inconsistency felt like another piece falling into place. My anger grew alongside the certainty. It wasn't just betrayal of me. It was betrayal of our son, of our family, of the promises he made with his own mouth and hands the day we stood at the altar. I thought of the child who had trusted his father enough to accept a bedtime story, only to be brushed aside while that man brought another woman into our home. That thought twisted inside me until it became rage. But I held my silence. I watched and waited, gathering not just suspicion but ammunition. I needed to know that when the confrontation came, there would be no escape, no chance for him to gaslight or dismiss. I wanted him cornered by truth, with no way out. The moment came sooner than I expected. He returned home late one evening, cheerful, humming under his breath. My patience snapped. The words spilled out before I could contain them, sharp and cutting. I asked who she was. His face froze, then shifted into practiced calm. He laughed, dismissing it as nonsense. You're imagining things. Kids say strange things. You know that. But I did not falter. I told him what our son had said, word for word. His eyes flickered, just for a second, before he regained composure. He leaned into denial, accusing me of letting paranoia poison me. He said I was tired, that the party had filled my head with nonsense. The smoothness of his tone almost made me doubt myself, but I had my evidence. I revealed what I had found. The messages, the names, the little digital love notes he had tried to keep hidden. His face shifted then, the mask cracking, though his mouth still tried to form excuses. He claimed it was harmless, just a flirtation, nothing serious. He insisted it never went further. Lies layered over lies, each one weaker than the last. The more he spoke, the less I recognized him. This was not the man I married, not the partner I trusted. This was someone who could kiss another woman while his child sat in the next room. Someone who could betray his family and then deny it with practiced ease. His words became background noise as the weight of the truth pressed down on me. I told him what mattered most, that our son had seen him. That no excuse, no denial, no apology could erase the image etched into a child's mind. He tried to downplay it, said children misinterpret things. But the calm way my boy had described it, the consistency of his story, left no room for doubt. He wasn't mistaken. He was a witness. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. He finally admitted enough to confirm what I already knew. Not all of it, not the full truth, but enough. He claimed weakness, loneliness, temptation. He painted himself as the victim of circumstance, as if betrayal were an accident. His words made me sick. The man who had sworn to cherish me, to protect our family, now stood before me unraveling his own lies with feigned remorse. The fury in me surged, but beneath it was grief. Years of memories, holidays, anniversaries, moments of joy, now tainted. The laughter we shared seemed hollow, the intimacy counterfeit. Everything I thought was solid turned to ash in my hands. Betrayal wasn't just the act of kissing another woman. It was the deliberate choice to destroy trust, to gamble with a family, for selfish desire. I told him I didn't care about his excuses. I told him the only truth that mattered was this. He had broken something that could not be mended easily, if at all. His eyes filled with desperation then, his voice pleading, begging me to see him as the man he once was. But that man was gone. What stood in front of me was a stranger who had chosen deceit over loyalty. That night, I lay in bed with my back turned to him, tears soaking the pillow silently. He slept on the edge, restless, shifting, perhaps realizing the gravity of what he had lost. Between us stretched a chasm that words could not bridge. The walls of our marriage had collapsed, and all that remained was the question of whether I would try to rebuild or leave the ruins behind. As the darkness pressed in, one truth echoed louder than all others. My son had been the one to reveal the betrayal, his innocent voice carrying more weight than any evidence I could gather. His words had become the light that forced me to see what was always there. And now, faced with the broken pieces of my life, I knew I could no longer turn away. The time for pretending was over. The truth had been exposed, and with it came the heavy burden of choice. The morning after the confrontation felt like stepping into an unfamiliar life. The air in the house was heavy, silence replacing what once had been easy conversation. My husband hovered, trying to act as if nothing had changed, offering me coffee, asking about plans for the day, but every word felt hollow. His presence, once comforting, now carried the sting of betrayal. I watched him carefully, every gesture reminding me of the lies he had spun, the deceit he had so willingly invited into our home. My heart no longer trusted him, and my mind no longer searched for excuses on his behalf. He tried to explain again, softer this time, claiming he had made a mistake, that it was meaningless, that he still loved me. The words slid across the surface of my anger, without penetrating it. Love was not a word that could survive the image of him with another woman in the very space where our child played. Love could not coexist with the memory of my son's wide, honest eyes describing the kiss he had witnessed. My husband wanted forgiveness without accountability, and the more he begged, the more distant I felt from him. The choice before me was one I never thought I would face. To stay meant stitching together a life built on fractured trust, forcing myself to smile when doubt clawed at my chest. To leave meant dismantling everything we had built, tearing apart the family we created. Neither path promised peace, but only one gave me dignity. I weighed the years we had shared against the wounds of betrayal, asking myself if I could ever look at him again without seeing the stranger he had become. Each time, the answer rose clear and sharp: no. My thoughts turned to my son. He was too young to understand marriage, vows, or betrayal, but he understood truth. His innocence had revealed the reality I was too blind or too trusting to see. What kind of example would I set if I stayed, pretending his father's actions could be excused? What would he learn about love, respect, and loyalty if I allowed deceit to remain unpunished? The burden of choice was not just about me. It was about the future my child would grow into. I imagined him years later, recalling the night he told me the truth. Would he remember me as strong, someone who valued honesty and self-respect, or as weak, someone who turned away from reality because it was easier to live in denial? That thought hardened my resolve. The pain of ending a marriage was immense, but the pain of teaching my son that betrayal could be tolerated was far greater. When I told my husband that I could not continue, the mask finally slipped. Anger flickered across his face, followed by desperation, then resignation. He pleaded, promised, even swore it would never happen again, but each word sounded like another lie stacked upon the first. I listened in silence, because the truth was no longer negotiable. A marriage built on deceit was not a marriage at all. I began the process of detaching piece by piece. It was not dramatic or loud, but steady and deliberate. The plans for separation unfolded quietly, with the calmness that comes when pain turns into clarity. I arranged my priorities around my son, ensuring he felt safe, loved, and shielded from the chaos. My husband's betrayal had cracked our family, but I refused to let it break my child's spirit. He would not grow up believing dishonesty was normal or acceptable. As the days passed, I realized something unexpected. Strength was not in pretending everything was fine, but in accepting that it wasn't. For so long, I had ignored the signs, dismissed my instincts, and silenced my doubts. My son's words had been the spark that forced me to confront reality, and in doing so, I discovered resilience I didn't know I had. Pain had stripped away illusion, leaving behind a clearer sense of who I was and what I deserved. My husband moved through the stages of regret, sometimes angry, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes trying to charm his way back into my good graces. But I no longer swayed. The part of me that once believed in us had been severed, not by a single kiss, but by the choice he made to betray trust and then lie about it. Forgiveness might come one day in some distant form, but reconciliation was impossible. Some wounds heal into scars, but others mark the end of a story. There were nights when loneliness wrapped around me, when the silence of the house felt suffocating, when I missed the idea of the man I thought I married. But each time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the truth. Love without trust is nothing more than performance. What I missed was not the man before me, but the illusion of who I believed him to be. That illusion was gone forever, and I would not chase it. Through it all, my son remained my anchor. His laughter, his questions, his small hand reaching for mine reminded me daily why I chose the harder path. He had unknowingly shown me the truth, and I owed him a life built on honesty, not deceit. The resilience I found was for him as much as for me. I wanted him to see a mother who valued her worth, who would not accept less than respect, who walked away when trust was broken beyond repair. In the quiet moments, when the anger softened into sorrow, I reflected on what I had lost and what I had gained. I lost the illusion of a faithful partner, but I gained clarity, self-respect, and the courage to step into an unknown future. I lost the comfort of a shared home, but I gained the strength of independence. The betrayal shattered me, but in the ruins, I discovered a foundation strong enough to rebuild on my own terms. When I think back to that night, I realize my son's words did more than make me shudder. They changed the entire course of my life. They forced me to confront what I had ignored, to act when silence would have destroyed me. Betrayal had entered my home, but it was truth, spoken by the smallest voice, that set me free. The end of my marriage was not the end of me. It was the beginning of a life where honesty mattered more than appearances, where love would be measured not by empty promises, but by actions. And as I walked forward into that life, one step at a time, I carried with me the unshakable knowledge that even in the darkest moments, truth has a way of revealing itself. Sometimes, it comes not from suspicion or evidence, but from the innocent words of a child who simply says what he sees. Those words had shattered me. Yes, but they had also saved me.